Well, our next speaker is first going to get a shout out, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill. Let's shout it out for him. Dr. Hill almost needs no introduction. He's one of the nation's leading hip-hop generation intellectuals. Since 2009, he has been an associate professor of education at Teachers College at Columbia University. His research focuses on the intersection between culture, politics, and education. His newest book is entitled The Classroom and the Cell, Conversations on Black Life. How many of you have it? All right. If you don't have it, you know you need to get it. He also is the host of the nationally syndicated television show, Our World with Black Enterprise, which airs on Sunday mornings on TV One. He also provides regular commentary on CNN and MSNBC. Basically, Mark Hill is a Renaissance man. In addition to all of his other accomplishments, he also holds a PhD with distinction from the University of Pennsylvania. And last but not least, he's on our side. And that's what really, really counts. So now that I've introduced him, we're searching for him. There he is. Okay. So let's have a warm welcome for Mark Lamont Hill.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Free the Lamb. Free Mumia. Free CC McDonald. Free them all. Free them all. It is honestly and truly an honor to be here with you all this evening. I'm always excited to talk about issues of great importance to our society. I get the privilege of traveling around the country and speaking about issues of politics, issues of culture, issues of education, of course. But there's nothing more important than the work that's being done in this room today at this conference, thinking about beyond the bars. Because we are facing a moment of mass incarceration. We are facing a moment where it is easier to imagine the end of the world itself than to imagine an end to prisons. And so what I want to do in a little bit of time that I have here today, because I really want you all to have an opportunity to hear the great, brilliant Angela Davis, who I came to see and hear. In a little bit of time that I have, I want us to think about what it means to think beyond the bars, what it means for us to reimagine the world in such a way that the prison is not the central site of containment, that the prison isn't the central way that we adjudicate disputes, that the prison isn't the primary site that we deal with social trauma and social dilemmas. I want us to imagine a world without prisons. But to do that, first of all, first thing we have to do is begin to understand what's going on. We have to begin to imagine the very context that we're trying to change. In order to imagine a world without prisons, we have to understand what it really means to live in the age of mass incarceration. To live in the age of mass incarceration, which we do, first is to understand that here in the United States, we have developed a commitment and obsession, even an addiction to containment and confinement, of caging bodies. We have developed an obsession that is so extraordinary that right now 1 in 100 American adults is incarcerated. 1 in 100 American adults. Those numbers are stunning and shocking on their face, but if you were to then drill a little bit deeper and juxtapose the American confinement numbers to those of anywhere else in the world, you go to Canada, we got more. Go to Canada and France, add them up, we got more. Go to Canada and France and Germany, we have more. You go to Ireland, you go to Norway, you go to France, add them up, we have more. Some of y'all get George Bushian on me and say, yeah, but that's because that's the first world. You go to the global south. Go to the so-called third world and see what they have. Well, let's try it. Let's go to George Bush's axis of evil. Let's go to North Korea. Let's go to Venezuela. Let's go to China. Let's go to Cuba. Let's add them all up. Throw in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran. You add them all up, and we have more. We have developed an obsession with incarceration that is historically unprecedented. And then when you add that elephant in the room of race, the numbers become even more stark. You look up and you say, wait a minute, 1 in 3 black men between 20 and 29 on parole, probation, or incarcerated. Black women, the fastest growing population of incarcerated bodies. You say, wait a minute. Latinos, the numbers are not very different from black bodies. 1 in 5 between those 20-year-old age brackets. We have obsessed with incarcerating our citizens. That's what it means to live in the age of incarceration. To live in the age of incarceration is not just to incarcerate lots of people, but it's to develop a logic that says that incarceration is the answer. Over the last 30 years, we have shrunk the state. Well, in some ways, we've shrunk the state, right? The military keeps getting bigger. Welfare checks for corporations keep getting fatter. But we've shrunk the state in ways that divest from the people that need it the most, and incarceration has become the replacement for social investment. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan took out community-based funds for mental illness. So people who were getting mental health treatment in 1980, by 1985, were on the street. And then we made it illegal to be on the street. You go to New York, you go to Philadelphia, you even go to less relevant towns like Connecticut, and what you see is what? I'm just saying. You go to those towns, and you see social laws. You see state-level laws that are ostensibly designed to clean up the neighborhoods. So people who were in mental illness facilities are now on the street, and now we develop anti-loitering laws, anti-vagrancy laws, anti-panhandling laws. We basically made it illegal to be homeless. People who are needing medical assistance for mental illness are now on the street, and they're forced to self-medicate through drugs which we made illegal. And then magically at the very same time, crack hits the streets. So people who need to self-medicate now have a cheap synthetic drug, and then we prosecute a war on those very drugs. We prosecute a war on drugs that made drugs cheaper, easier to get, and stronger than ever. We lost. And we always will, brother. So we got people on the street, homeless, drug addicted, and we've criminalized all of it. And then we put them in the prison without any mental facilities, without any substantive medical help. We subject them to more trauma. We've developed no mechanism to protect men or women from sexual abuse, and then they come out more damaged, still drug addicted, and with the criminal record. And as Michelle Alexander pointed to us in her masterful book, we realize that once you get out, things are even worse because you can't get a job, you can't get public assistance, you can't get credit, you can't vote in many states, so you've become a second-class citizen. We have created a context of incarceration, and it's become normal. This is what it means to live in an age of mass incarceration. It's not just that we lock up a bunch of people, it's that we've normalized incarceration as the mechanism. We have built more prisons than ever. The only sustainable form of public housing that has been expanded and developed in the last 30 years has been the prison. So, we do all this stuff, y'all. This is the age of incarceration. And then against our young people, we've prosecuted the war even tighter. Here in New York, we got curfew laws. We have stop and frisk. Or was it stop, question, and frisk? They don't ask too many questions, though. We have developed civil injunctions against gangs on the West Coast and in the South. So that even the hint or suspicion that you might know somebody who's gang affiliated puts you on a list which makes it difficult to access public resources. It criminalizes you and you don't even know about it. So through public laws that make it illegal to stand on a corner, illegal to be on the subway, stop and frisk, and then you add to that these curfews. We have literally made it illegal to be young and black and outside. This is the real context. And then we walk into these schools, which have become even more criminalized than ever. Go to PS anything. Then go to a school in North Philly. Then go to school in Houston. Then go to school in New Orleans. Go to school in Watts. Travel around this country and look at lines of young, innocent, black and brown and poor white people trying to get into school, and it takes them 20 minutes to get into their school buildings because they have to navigate an infrastructure of containment, an infrastructure of surveillance. They walk through and they're being scanned. They walk through the school building and they're being searched. There's metal detectors on the walls, and in the middle of the building, there's surveillance cameras staring down at them. We spent more money on surveillance equipment in schools than in prisons over the last 5 years. We have a parole officer, a probation officer, a school officer, a real police officer. They're all there watching us, surveilling us, dogs sniffing between our children's legs, people digging in our lockers, searching us. And it takes us 20 minutes to get into the school because of all that surveillance. And when we finally get into the school, ain't nobody stopping us from leaving. Think about it. What does it mean for all of our investment, all of our commitment to be on the containment side, on the surveillance side, but not on the investment side? We have literally replaced the language of investment and love with one of containment and blame. That's what it means to live in the age of incarceration. It means that we've normalized the social misery of the most marginal folk. It means that we've normalized replacing medical treatment for drugs with incarceration. We've normalized treating poverty with prison rather than a social state. And then what we've done is, it's even worse, and this is important, y'all. We have created a public animus against the public. We have literally decided that anything public except for prison is problematic. How does that happen? Well, we paint the public as black and brown. What they do is they decided that anything that is public is black and brown so that y'all will vote against it. Anything that's public, we now code as black and brown and poor so that people, even the people who need it, won't want it. Public housing, black. Now, never mind the fact that most of the money goes to white folk getting housing subsidies for the suburbs. Public housing becomes black. Public school becomes black. Public transportation becomes black. Public assistance becomes black. Public options become black. Shit, public intellectuals become black. And as a response to that, we don't want it. And when you don't want it, the public interest becomes privatized. And that's exactly what has happened in the age of incarceration. We have privatized punishment. And as a result of the privatization of punishment, there's no investment in an alternative. We can't think beyond the bars because the money is in the bars. Gil Scott-Heron said everybody loves peace. The problem is you can't make no money off of it. While I was writing the book with Mualimm-ak, that book, The Classroom in the Cell, Conversations on Black Life in America, is a book that I co-authored with Mualimm-ak while he was still on death row. And I remember, and I'm going to take my seat in a second, but I remember being there. And I went to Waynesburg, PA to see him. This is before he was off of death row. And I remember going there doing a guard change, a shift change. There was a different set of COs coming in. And I remember sitting there waiting, and as I was waiting and talking to the person who I came with, COs came out and they were talking and they were making jokes, and I said, y'all all seem like y'all know each other. He said, yeah, we do. He said, most of us went to high school together. Most of us grew up together. I said, where'd y'all grow up? He said, up the street. And I began to do some research on Waynesburg, and you could go to other towns. My brother was locked up 50 miles north of that, same thing, same type of prison, same type of COs. They all are from the town. They all got their jobs through the same people. And the people who don't work as COs, their wives or their husbands or their friends or their cousins might work in the cafeteria. Or they might be janitors in the facility. Or some have their own businesses and they contract out to the prison. Some are electricians and they come and fix the electricity when they feel like it. And all of them have a material investment in the prison. That's what I mean. The age of incarceration, this moment is not just one where people are locked up. It's one where our entire economic existence hinges on the existence of the prison. Because if you go into Waynesburg, they all got jobs because that prison is there. And the people in the prison, hold on, the people in the prison ain't from Waynesburg. They from North Philly. They from West Philly, born and raised on the playground. No. And so these people move from the parts of Pennsylvania to real Pennsylvania, and then they go from these two extremes of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, and they go to the part of Pennsylvania we call Pennsyltucky, the red part of Pennsylvania. And these 5,000 or 10,000 black people, black men mostly, but increasingly black women, now descend into Waynesburg. So now the town of Waynesburg no longer has 5,000 citizens, it has 15,000 citizens. So now because Waynesburg's population has tripled, they get more money. They get more roads. They get more schools. If they get enough people, they even get more congressional representation. And so Waynesburg actually grows and builds and develops on the backs of prisoners who are in that prison and are not being represented. This is the reality. So then you get that job as the congressman and an anti-drug bill comes before your presence or a decarceration initiative comes before your desk and you have the option to liquidate prison. Your job hinges on you not doing that. The people who voted for you want to keep those jobs. In fact, they might want to create new laws to bolster the prison. And this is the thing y'all got to know, this is not new. Read Frederick Douglass. Read W.E.B. Du Bois. Read about that convict lease system where prisons were gone and we needed to figure out what to do with these people. So they gave them to former planters and former plantation owners and other private interests, and suddenly they found jobs for them and had no regard for their well-being. And suddenly when they realized they could make money off these prisoners, crime increased. They found more prisoners. This is the problem with the notion of late capitalism, which allows us to believe that private is okay. We watched an entire town wash away in New Orleans, and we did nothing because they were poor and black and disposable. 3 months later, we saw people's houses catch on fire in California, and what did we do? Those rich, wealthy homes got put out real quick. They took people out of prison and let them put out the fire. Chris Rock said they put it out with Katrina water. But those same people, but here's what's jacked up about it. Not just that these prisoners were forced to risk their lives to put out the fires, both literally and metaphorically, of rich white folk, but those same people, when they get out of prison, will have a felony record and can't become firefighters. This is the age of incarceration. This is the reality that we face. I could talk on and on, but I won't. I'll just say that the fundamental question that we have to wrestle with at some point, because at some point we all just preaching to the choir, although choir needs to be preached to sometime as well, is we have to figure out, what do we do? What do we do? Well, we have to ask different questions, family. We have to ask different questions. We cannot allow the conversation to continue to just be, why are these people getting locked up? Some of y'all look smart. Y'all go to Columbia. As you begin to deploy your work and you begin to engage in rigorous and sophisticated sociological analysis or historiographic analysis or some kind of rigorous, thoughtful practice, y'all got to shift your unit of analysis. Stop making studies about driving while black. Stop making movies like New Jersey Drive about driving while black. How about asking the question, not what does it mean to drive while black, but what does it mean to patrol while white? What does it mean to patrol while racist? Because that's actually the question we should be asking. Shift the unit of analysis. Ask a different question. Reimagine these possibilities. Part of what it means when the question becomes, what do we do, is to imagine new possibilities. Don't take for granted that we're the criminal class. Yeah, people get locked up on 125th Street. At least the real Harlem, 125th Street, not this stuff. Not this. But ask yourselves why, not why do these people, if I teach at this esteemed institution, we could do a raid on this campus right now. How many people will we lock up for after midnight for public drunkenness, public urination, simple possession of marijuana? I could go on. We don't look here. We had some drama at Barnard last year. Y'all ain't heard nothing else about it. There's a reason for that. 80% of New York State prisoners come from 3 counties, and there's a reason why. It ain't because we're more prone to criminality. It ain't because we're worse people. It's not because our children were produced in a net of criminality. It ain't because we're slow runners. We can't run from the cops no more. It's none of that. It's that we've made a decision to target certain populations. People don't commit crimes, they commit acts. And certain acts get criminalized, and certain communities get criminalized. We have the power to change that. Finally, when the question becomes, what do? We must organize. We must organize. We must organize. It feels good to be with y'all. I promise it does. It feels good to talk to y'all. It feels good to learn with y'all. It feels good to build with y'all. But when we leave here, if all we do is tweet and poke each other, whatever that means, and like on Facebook, then we have wasted our time. We have wasted our time. To organize means to grow and build infrastructure. Angela Davis wrote an amazing book, Why Our Prison's Obsolete, but she also helped found critical resistance. It's infrastructure movements. We must join organizations. I ain't say start organizations. I said join organizations. That's not to suggest that we don't need to start some organizations. But too often at this moment, we become so divided that we are more prone to start an organization than to fortify the ones we already have and to bring our pieces together for something bigger than us. I'm on the road all the time. I go to college campuses like this one where they only have about 50 black people. $50 black people in 25 organizations. And everybody's president and vice president. That's not about the movement. That's about you. To organize is to build something that is bigger than you, that has a grander purpose than you, and that might exist with you, not in the foreground, but in the background, building and struggling and sacrificing and working. That's what it means to organize. To organize means to divest yourself of your privilege. To divest yourself of privilege. When Du Bois wrote his, I would argue, the most important work of the 20th century, Black Reconstruction, he framed the book in many interesting ways, and it really set the stage for everything from critical whiteness studies to urban sociology to Marx's historiography, but those first 3 chapters are fascinating to me because he dealt with the question of the slave and the white worker and the planter, and he fundamentally was wrestling with the question of why would a white worker side with the planter, the managerial class, as opposed to the slave? Because as long as slaves exist, slave masters don't retire, right? So as long as slaves exist, the white worker is going to be priced out of the market. Why would you, white worker? Why would you, white worker, want not to end slavery? Because you will never have economic justice as long as this black person is exploited. But he said the reason they do is because they get a type of almost existential pleasure out of siding with whiteness, at closing ranks around whiteness. He said they enjoy the psychic wages of whiteness. The psychic wages of whiteness. To organize in the 21st century, y'all got to divest yourselves of whiteness. We have to end whiteness. We have to destroy whiteness. We ain't got to destroy white people, at least not with the camera on. But we have to destroy whiteness. It is an unhealthy, destructive construct that hinges purely on unmerited power and suffering of others. We must destroy it. We must destroy male privilege. There can be no movement that is shot through with hypermasculinity. 21st century movement politics has to be different. We cannot shut down the prison as long as we continue to normalize charismatic male leadership. And yes, I see the contradiction in me saying that while I got y'all cheering at a microphone. I get it. But part of what that means is for us to critique and challenge each other and be willing and open to hearing that. We must destroy male privilege. We must destroy whiteness. We must destroy misogyny. We must destroy homophobia. We must destroy heteronormativity. We must do this. We cannot end the prison if we don't kill those isms. And lastly, and I'm really going to take my seat this time, we must hope relentlessly. We must hope relentlessly. We must hope relentlessly. We must believe that another world is possible and be courageous enough to fight for it. Be courageous enough to struggle for it. Be courageous enough to die for it. Now, I ain't saying we all got to die. That ain't my thing, but I ain't on no Jim Jones stuff, but there has to be a struggle or a sacrifice worth dying for. When Angela Davis is facing the death chamber 3 times, they charged her for death 3 times. When that happens, that's a sign of the state that our very bodies are disposable, and yet she continued to struggle and sacrifice. When Mumia stands on death row for 30 years, it's for a struggle that's bigger than him. We must no longer be afraid of death. We can't be afraid to not struggle and sacrifice in spite of it, because guess what, y'all gonna die anyway. You're all death eligible. Not just the folk on death row. You can stigmatize people with HIV and cancer and say they die. No, you dying, we all gonna die. Life is a terminal illness. And it's sexually transmitted. So instead of trying to find ways to deny, duck, or dodge death, let's find a cause and a commitment worth struggling and dying for. Let's put our bodies on the line for this project of ending prison, of ending mass incarceration, of engaging in excarceration and decarceration. Let's hope relentlessly, and family, don't get down when we lose. Like my brother Kweli said, even when we suffer losses, I count the victories. Because we must count those victories. We must not sit here and just look at the 2.5 million people in prison and say we lost. Let's look at the fact that over the last 8 years, the numbers have dropped. Let's look at the fact that through the work that's being done, people are healed. People are getting protection. People are getting refuge from sexual assault. We are fighting and we are winning. Whenever we fight, we win, but we must continue to struggle and sacrifice against the odds. And some of you are so ideologically pure that you forget the fact that sometimes we win anyway. When Mumia was taken off of death row, people said it couldn't happen. There was no evidence that Mumia was going to be off of death row. His appeals were exhausted. The court said no. The court of public opinion said no. Every law that he showed to show that they were wrong, they ignored. And yet we continued to struggle. Pam Africa continued to struggle. Laura Whitehorn continued to struggle. Sophia Lodge continued to struggle. Millions of people around the world continued to struggle. And in December of 2011, Mumia was moved off of death row. But some of y'all said, no, that ain't enough. Some people, I remember the day Mumia was free, some of us celebrated. I remember Lumumba Bandeli called me, and we were crying, and we were celebrating, and we were happy. And some people said, he's not home. This is not a victory. We can't count this. We should reject this. We should not be happy that Mumia is still in the system, even if he's off of death row. And I felt bad for feeling good. And so I went to see Mumia about 2 months later. And I told him what happened. I said, yo, Mu, I said, people are saying that we shouldn't be happy. People are saying this is not a victory. People say that getting off death row doesn't count. Do you know what Mumia said? Shit. He said, anybody who say that ain't been on death row. He said, I haven't been able to touch my children for 3 decades. I haven't been able to hug my wife for 3 decades. I have grandchildren who I've never even been able to smell. I have had no access to people for 3 decades. You all sacrificed. You all struggled. And now I have lived. This does count as a victory. We must count those victories even against the odds. In fact, because of the odds. That's what Baldwin was saying to my dear sister Angela Davis. In his letter to her in 1970, he said, those of us who know the truth and do nothing are worse than the murderers hired in our names. He said, those of us who know must fight for your life as if it were our own, which it is, and obstruct with our bodies the corridor to the gas chamber. For if they come for you in the morning, if they take you in the morning, they will come for us that night. This work is designed to block the corridor to the gas chamber for the millions of people on death row unnecessarily. But it's also to block the slow death chamber of people dying in prisons, not just in America, but in Abu Ghraib, in Guantanamo, in China, in Korea, all around the globe. We must block the corridor to the gas chamber for everybody catching hell. We must block the corridor to the gas chamber for people who have a better chance of going to the state pen in Penn State. We must block the corridor to the gas chamber for anybody in this state that is dealing with injustice, unfreedom, and anti-democracy. We must do this struggle. We must do this work because when we fight, we win. And we will fight. We will win. We will think beyond the bars, and we will develop a world without prisons. Free Mumia.